Good day, folks. This is John Mark Gray. We will fuse a little politics with economics in this video. And by the way, check out my books if you are interested, but let's get started with our discussion. Suddenly, the affordability crisis, once a mere whisper, now seems to echo loudly in Donald Trump's political chambers, conveniently as the specter of midterm elections looms large. A seismic shift in the political landscape, evident in recent election results from regions that once championed him but are now leaning Democratic, appears to have delivered a harsh dose of reality. This isn't newfound economic enlightenment. It's a panicked political reckoning, a realization that his past and current, ill-conceived inflationary policies, the crippling tariffs and the grandiose Big Beautiful Bill, are now hitting home with devastating clarity. But alas, Mr. Trump, this belated concern rings hollow. Your campaign promises of fiscal austerity and slashing government spending evaporated like mist, replaced by the largest, most extravagant spending bill in our nation's history. And for those struggling consumers you vowed to uplift from the crushing cost of living, your inaugural policy gambit was to unleash a barrage of ridiculous tariffs on virtually every imported good, from the humble kitchen appliance to the essential lumber for our homes. This wasn't shrewd economic strategy. It was a self-inflicted problem, as any basic economist could have foretold, for these punitive taxes inevitably cascade down, landing squarely on the shoulders of everyday Americans, who ultimately bear the brunt of such ill-advised revenue-generating schemes. The true motive behind these tariffs, then, reveals itself as a cynical maneuver to paper over the colossal fiscal gap created by his poorly conceived tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy, many of whom already skirt their statutory tax obligations. With our national debt spiraling towards an unfathomable $40 trillion and budget deficits widening relentlessly, President Trump was desperate to avoid a full-blown financial meltdown. He feared the bond markets, those unforgiving arbiters of fiscal responsibility, would revolt, sending interest rates skyrocketing and exposing the true fragility of America's economic foundation. In essence, these tariffs were a desperate fiscal plaster, hastily applied to staunch the bleeding from his deficit-inflating tax cuts. The stark reality is that average American consumers, unknowingly perhaps, were conscripted into subsidizing a massive corporate tax giveaway. Our nation simply cannot bear this financial burden. It's why the national debt has ballooned to truly unsustainable heights, threatening to consume an ever larger chunk of our federal budget, soon. The mere interest payments on this staggering debt will rival some of our most critical national expenditures. This isn't merely poor policymaking, it's a catastrophic recipe for national insolvency. The Trump presidency, rather than confronting the urgent need for fundamental financial reforms, became yet another four-year exercise in deferring the inevitable. A reckless postponement of the tough decisions required to balance our annual budget and rein in our runaway national debt. The sudden, almost theatrical concern for affordability wasn't born from economic epiphany, but from raw political calculus. A Republican debacle in the midterms, leading to a Democratic takeover of the House, would instantly relegate Donald Trump's presidency to an ignominious, lame duck status, effectively stripping him of any meaningful power in Washington and rendering his legislative agenda inert. Beyond legislative impotence, the specter of another impeachment proceeding looms large, a direct consequence of his audacious oversteps as president. From provocative threats against sovereign nations to glaring conflicts of interest stemming from his sprawling private business dealings and a general pattern of chaotic governance, his tenure is marked by a complete disregard for traditional boundaries and norms. Indeed, the presidency, under Trump, often mirrors the actions of an authoritarian leader, a concerning trend critics also attributed to the prior Biden administration, operating seemingly without the crucial guardrails of government checks and balances. This unchecked behavior, enabled by his party, inevitably carries severe political repercussions, making the threat of impeachment a very tangible concern for his current administration. Regardless, Donald Trump might attempt superficial adjustments to manipulate the economy, like installing puppet figures at the Federal Reserve or directing government agencies to artificially influence bond markets by purchasing mortgages. He might even issue executive decrees, dictating to corporations where they can and cannot invest, perhaps even barring them from buying single-family homes for rental portfolios. But these are mere theatrical gestures, dictatorial commands that barely scratch the surface of the underlying problem. Yet, none of these interventions address the core malignancy. They are merely diversions from the true crisis. The real antagonist is a federal government relentlessly devaluing the US dollar through an insatiable appetite for infinite money printing and unchecked spending that dwarfs our actual revenue. This profligate spending, fueled by a relentless drive for ever larger government programs, is systematically eroding the purchasing power of every American. Layered atop this fiscal recklessness are poorly conceived inflationary policies, like those crippling tariffs and a suffocating tangle of unnecessary government regulations. The irony is stark. For a Republican, Donald Trump has historically extended the government's reach into every imaginable corner of American life. Far from shrinking the state, his policies champion a more pervasive, more intrusive governmental presence in our daily affairs. Fundamentally, long-term interest rates are supposed to be dictated by sound financial principles and the immutable laws of economics. But when the cost of everything relentlessly climbs, forcing businesses to hike prices and workers to demand ever higher wages just to survive in a hyperinflationary maelstrom, it signals a profound, systemic dysfunction within our financial ecosystem. This is the genuine crisis, the festering wound that demands immediate and radical attention from our federal government. The solution, though politically challenging, is fundamentally simple: less government. A leaner state translates directly into reduced spending and manageable debt obligations. It means an end to the reckless money printing that fuels our unsustainable national debt through stealth monetization, thereby safeguarding the hard-earned purchasing power of consumers. Furthermore, a decisive reduction in burdensome government regulations would slash costs across every overcomplicated sector of our society. Scrapping destructive policies like artificial tariffs on imports would unleash the true power of free market principles, fostering genuine competition, driving down prices for all consumers, and invigorating every corner of our economy. What we desperately need is an embrace of free markets, not an expansion of government's distorting influence. So, Mr. Trump, you were given the opportunity to champion affordability, to steer the nation away from fiscal peril. Instead, you deliberately chose the path of inflation, a choice amplified by official government inflation numbers that, to many, seem purposely manipulated and utterly divorced from reality. The true inflation rate, felt acutely in the tightening grip on every American household, is far more brutal, as prices for essential goods and services soar at an alarming, almost predatory, pace, rendering basic necessities increasingly out of reach. This is a cruel, self-perpetuating cycle, and once ignited, it becomes a raging inferno, almost impossible to extinguish without resorting to drastic and painful measures. The paramount lesson, therefore, is to prevent this insidious inflationary spiral from ever taking hold in an economy. Regrettably, it seems an ugly truth must be faced. Only a severe recession, one that strips jobs and chills demand, might finally curb America's runaway inflation problem. For when unemployment bites deep and the consumer's wallet is empty, the ability to continually hike prices for unaffordable goods and services simply vanishes from the marketplace. Thus, we brace for the impending, brutal recession, a bitter medicine perhaps, but one we desperately hope will finally jolt our government out of its complacency, compelling it to enact the genuine, overdue financial reforms that Washington has so long evaded.